Welcome aboard all. This week I'm going back to the channel's roots and I'm going to do a tutorial on TrainController. So some time ago I did a tutorial on what I call the Kadee Dance, is where the locomotive pushes back against the Kadee Couplers to take up the slack, and then an uncoupling magnet uncouples the locomotive from the rake of wagons. This time around I'm going to dive in very deep and show you exactly how I do it within the software. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Daz from Motororo Technique. Our YouTube channel produces video podcasts showcasing modelers from all around the world. And as we are doing this week, also do some how-to videos in there for a good mix. If you know a modeler that might fit the bill, email link is below. Please email and I'll endeavour to get them on the channel. If there's any how-to videos you might like me to do, also reach out, email me and see what we can do. Don't forget to subscribe and like and hit that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos so you don't miss out any content. Also, I've got a Patreon page. Big shout out to all my super fans out there for helping me out. Every little bit counts. Scenery lighting without wiring, so powerful yet so easy. DwarvenEnterprises.com. Dwarven Enterprises will be offering MRT viewers a 10% discount on all sales. Use the code word MRT2021 to get this deal. Let's start with a little bit of a teaser on what we're trying to achieve here. So you can see the train starting under the green signal there, transverse into the yard. Starts a slow down process, fire an action marker. It's coming up to the infrared detectors there, slows down to a very slow threshold speed and then goes through the Kadee dance. So one of the first things we need to do is sort out our engine functions within TrainController. So obviously we won't go through how you put engines on here, that might be for another video. So this is the list of all my engines and all the wagon sets. So what we'll have a look at is, let's have a look at this little G45, which is a 260 steamer. So then we'll go to the functions tab. So the functions tab are purely the DCC functions. So I've got light, turn the sound on off, a whistle, the coupler and coal shoveling, a whole lot of other things. So then where this sort of program comes into its own is you can set up these other functions and set up like a macro within it. So what a macro is the function button is pushed and it'll do certain things. So this one here is, so the first one I'm going to look at is the move near. So that the move near is so the locomotive backing up, taking the slack off the coupler with the wagon set before the uncoupling magnet will turn on. So here we're going to go look at a speed of 5 kilometers per hour. So you might want to set that at whatever speed you want to. I've just set it at my threshold speed. So threshold speed is the speed that you'll set up very early on when you're doing your profile runs within TrainController. So then we're going to look at a delay. So the delay is, for this one, is 2.125 seconds. So you might think that's a little bit of very, very finite sort of amount of time. So this is the one you're going to have to play around with when you're going and setting up the locomotives for this to work. Because obviously every locomotive is going to be different depending on the type of decoder they got, the motor, and so forth and so on. So what that actually does is, so what it's going to do is the locomotive is going to go through its startup sequence within the sound decoder as well. And then sometimes it'll just sit there, it'll throttle up, and then it'll move back. So that 2.25 seconds is just enough to maybe move the locomotive 1 centimeter or 1/4 of an inch or something to take that slack off. And then it'll go into an emergency stop. So it's exactly the same function for what we call the move away. So the move away function is, so once the uncoupler has gone on, the Kadee coupler has come undone, you've got a successful uncouple, threshold speed, it'll delay, so it'll give it a chance to move the physical locomotive away from the wagon set and the layout. The 3.5 seconds, you don't need to be as accurate, so as long as you clear the uncoupler and then obviously goes through emergency stop for wait for its next command. First icon we're going to look at here is this little brown one here. So this is to control the uncoupling magnet. My uncoupling magnet is connected to a stationary decoder. So this one is via some relays, because obviously there's a fair bit of current that needs to be drawn to run the Kadee coupler. So that one here is the BYT1, so Belay Yard track number 1 IR detector. So how we're getting our very, very accurate stopping distances is using an infrared. So that too is connected to an Optio input via the LocoNet. So what that does is when the locomotive comes across its beam, it breaks the beam, switches the indicator on, I should say, and then that tells the system to start to count down for its stopping mechanism. So we're just going to have a look at this one here, which is the little uncoupling mechanism. So go straight to the operation. So this is where the heart of the Kadee Dance actually works. So this is the functions that we're going to step through are some for TrainController to work and some for the physical locomotive to do its thing. So the reason why we've got the join here is this is a function within TrainController. So if we, for whatever reason, the Kadee Dance within what I'm going to call the real world or on the layout fails to work, if we need to go through and do it again, it'll rejoin what I'm going to call the soft locomotive to the soft wagon on the TrainController switchboard. So that'll join, so it'll then push the locomotive backwards within the virtual world, we'll call it. A delay of 2 seconds, and then we're going to move near again. So the move near we spoke about briefly is the functions within the physical locomotive. So that'll put it on a threshold speed, wait a number of seconds, which will then push the locomotive back or reverse the locomotive, and then emergency stop. Then we're going to wait another 3 seconds, and then we're going to physically reverse the locomotive properly. So after 5 seconds, we had another delay. So what happens there is so the locomotive will push back, wait a short amount of time, the uncoupler will now turn on with the next function. So it'll physically turn the electromagnetic coupler on, wait a second, the couplers will come undone, or the claws of the couplers will come undone, and then we go to the next function of the locomotive, which is move away. So it's going to put it into forward mode, push the locomotive, drive the locomotive away just to clear the uncoupler, and 9 times out of 10, it'll uncouple the locomotive from the wagon set. So then we're going to wait another 4 seconds and then physically turn the coupler off. So the reason why I want to do that, we don't want to leave these couplers on because they get very, very warm and they can overheat, and my understanding they can catch fire. So you can see within TrainController we're using a lot of different delays here. So TrainController doesn't like a lot of functions on the top of each other without sort of a little bit of delay in it. So then what we're going to do here, now we're going back into the virtual world. So it's going to delay of 1 second. So then we're going to go a prerequisite with the contact indicator of the infrared detector is on. And then it's going to physically separate the locomotive within the virtual world. So that's when you'll get the little red arrow between the locomotive and the wagon set. Then it'll turn the button off, so it'll turn it back to yellow, and then obviously I've got a little sound here to say that it's chimed and it's finished its function. So the next one we're going to look at is BYT1 Auto Park. So when this button is active, what it does is, so when a train transverses in via here onto BY1, it'll come through its slow down functions or sequence, and if this button is activated and we get a successful uncouple, it'll then park itself automatically on another schedule back into the turntable here proper. For the automatic schedule to head back to the engine shed to park the incoming freight engine, there's certain conditions or prerequisites. So just back into the BYT1 uncoupler button here. So I'll point you back up to this prerequisite that the detector needs to be turned on, which is the current state as it is right now, as you can see, with no light. So what it actually means is if the Kadee shuffle or the Kadee uncoupling is not successful and that schedule starts, it'll pull one wagon through the infrared detector, and if it then picks up that turns the infrared off and the light goes yellow, it will automatically stop the schedule back to the turntable. So that was a little fail-safe guard we put in to prevent a whole train ending up in the turntable district. Now that we've touched on an automatic schedule starting. So what that actually means is, so you've got a train that's coming in from this BY up into BY in, then onto BY1. It'll go through its slowdown phase and it'll stop over the electromagnet. So if this little button here is turned on into the on state, what that actually means is that it will then activate this button here. So what it actually means is if this button here is in the on state, so the on state looks like that. So if it's actually on that state there, what it'll actually do is if it goes through its uncoupling sequence, the Kadee Dance, we get a successful separation from locomotive to wagon set. An automatic schedule will then go off to the turntable as discussed. So this is just one way of turning that function on and off, more for a testing point of view. When I'm doing my operation and live layout, I normally have this on, depending on the operator. Sometimes they like to be able to have a little more control over what trains are coming to and from the turntable. So what actually makes the schedule start, the automatic schedule back to the turntable start? It's probably a little bit hard to see, but there's a little icon here, or a flagman. So what triggers that off is some ands and ors and a combi group. So I'll just quickly go through these. So obviously we need the button on, which we just talked about just before, which is the auto park. So the auto park is the button that is the auto parking of the freight. It's the auto park which it sets up. The auto park sends back the freight locomotive to the turntable district. So if we've got OR, this OR statement, so it's either one of these. So it's either the IR stop or the simulator stop. So we touched on those briefly just before. So the simulator stop is for when we're in the virtual world, when we're not online with we're not connected to the layout proper. And the IR stop is when we're using the infrared to activate the stopping distance. Now we've also got combi group. So the BY1 is in its current state, or the block is current, meaning there's a locomotive currently in there. And then we've got the combi group, so it's looking for the wagon sets. So as we discussed, I have vehicle groups, so I've set them up, all the different locomotives from my European and also my Australian locomotives. And we've got a condition on that. So the condition being AND group. Now we've got conditions on that. So the condition being the AND group, and it'll look for, we have to have one locomotive and one wagon set. So that's just what the system's going to look for, and not it already been reserved by another sequence of a train that wants to start the auto park sequence. So obviously this can't be used when there's already a train that's already on the auto park sequence. And the operations tab side of things, so in the on state, obviously we've got a delay. It automatically sets the uncoupler button to green, so that turns it on. So that means it'll go through its uncoupling sequence. So once that's finished, it'll go for another lengthy delay. Then it turns on this shunt 1 button, which is over here. So what that actually does is it sets up some collision avoidance measures and blocks a few of the blocks in this bottom half of the yard. So it'll block out, so a train can't come into BY1, and also it'll also block out so nothing can come out of BY4, because obviously we're going to be using this slip switch here to get our train back into an auto park, and then it's going to start it's then going to activate this button here, which is the park incoming engine. So that starts the schedule back to the turntable. So what we'll do, we'll quickly go and have a look at the block within TrainController and how we set it up. So I'll just go through the main sort of markers and all that at this point. So I've got a little bit of a graphical drawing that was given to me by the gentleman who designed this system that probably explains it a little bit easier about how all these markers interact with each other. So the ones that we're going to be looking at are this action marker here, which is the action marker BY1 slow. So in effect, as soon as the train hits that, it drops to a speed of 20 kilometers an hour within TrainController, and that's the first block section there. So these two markers here is what I was talking about. These are for the simulator. So the reason why we've got those in, if we want to test it within the simulator mode, we don't obviously have the infrared detector, so we can't actually test the system whether it actually works or not. So this block here is approximately 50 centimeters long, all right, but you'll notice that the stop marker is 100 centimeters. So what we need, the reason why we've done that, so in the simulator mode, it'll hit this marker because it won't use any of these here, and I'll explain that in a sec. But on the real life layout, it'll never get to a meter into that block because it just does not exist. So I've tricked the system into being allowed to use the simulator. The other markers we're going to use are another function marker here, which is the active marker. So the infrared is active, and also that's got its corresponding flagman. So obviously it's got numerous triggers here that we'll go through when I go through that document in a sec. And we've got the stop marker for what we're calling the IR stop marker, and also it has its corresponding flagman. Got a bit more of a graphical view of what this actually does, which might be a little bit easier to explain. So we've got a train that runs in this direction here from the left hand side to the right hand side. So then what we've got, so we've got the IR beam here as it's traveling. So if we can sort of look at this as how the block is set up. So what happens, as soon as it hits the slow section, it goes down automatically to 30 kilometers an hour within the train controller. Then once it gets into this next brake section, so this first part here is just if we're going to use the simulator. So for this demonstration I'm going to use, say if we're using the layout live, so out in the layout room proper. So it'll hit the brake section. So this is the train's heading from left to right. Then it'll hit the IR beam. So at that point, the front of the engine breaks the IR beam, and the IR reach flag turns on. So that's that flagman that sits in here. So to give you an idea, the triggers on this flagman are, so it's an AND statement, so that means and this and that with or of one of these two. So for it to work, so the BY1 brake occupancy detection needs to be on, which is definitely going to be once the train is in this block. Now we've got a combi group of a train that's current in the block, which is also true, and then a train moving. So the moving train is what we've set up in a train description. So how we've done that is train descriptions, go into train moving and the properties. So basically what it does, a minimum speed of 1 kilometer per hour. So when train controller is setting a train going at 1 kilometer per hour, that flag or that condition is met. So then what I've got around the various areas, so each area, so one in BY, one in LMS, one in Barham Station, I've got all the blocks listed. Now it does look like a fair bit of work to do this. Once you sort of get the flow with it, it's not that hard. So all it's looking for is each block is a current block, and then the combi group is train moving. So what it's looking for is combi group is looking for a train that's current in, let's say, BY down block, and that is doing 1 kilometer per hour within train control. So then we can have either or of these next ones. So the IR detector is currently off. So in its state when there's nothing broken the beam, the IR is actually in an on state. So once it breaks the beam, it turns off, and obviously the other one is the IR reach. So number 2 is, so once it's broken, it is the length of the train. So within train controller, you measure the length of each train, you put it into the lengths tab, and then minus 7 centimeters. So the reason why we did that for that particular instance is what we're finding is, but with locomotives such as this, where you've got a locomotive that's got a tender through it, there's a little gap. So depending on the height of the locomotive, because some of my locomotives are lower wheels like freight engines, and also some passenger engines with obviously much higher wheels, we couldn't just keep adjusting the IR infrared detector up and down. So what we've done, the detector then the beam is then broken by the tender. So that's when it starts counting down this 7 centimeters. So it'll go 7 centimeters, and then we come into number 3 here. So the IR stop marker turns on, which is this one here. Then after a centimeter of heading backwards, it'll stop the train. And the IR reach flag and the IR active turn off. So that's obviously the end of the stop process of the locomotive coming into the block. So this is where all the magic happens. Now, you can see with the part I'm circling there, you've got the uncoupling magnet, which is the little bit there I'm pointing to there. And when we turn the little uncoupler on, it turns green. You'll see that the locomotive will shuffle backwards, take the slack off, and the locomotive will uncouple from the rake of wagons. So TrainController has a lovely little feature, which is the traffic control window, which I'm showing you there. So what that actually is, that's showing my block BY1. So I'll just simulate what it looks like within TrainController when I go through the uncoupling sequence. So now when the button turns green, it goes through the Kadee shuffle. So the locomotive, as said before, will move backwards, take the slack off. And then I'll just show you what happens with the virtual wagon there. You can see I've got the cursor there, and you'll see a little arrow point up. So that actually means within the system that the locomotive is actually uncoupled at that point in time. Just activated there is a schedule that starts that sends the locomotive back to the engine facility there. So there's obviously a lot of code that goes in behind doing schedules, and I have previous videos on how that's done, so I'll link below, but it's a little bit beyond the scope of what just quickly what I'm trying to show you here today. So that engine will just tootle off onto its schedule towards the engine facility and be parked back in the turntable. As you can see, the engine is now on the turntable. It will spin around and TrainController will select what stall it goes into. I have 12 stalls and 9 of them are for freight locomotives.
Make sure you subscribe, click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon, like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Technique.